Hey guys, I'm Amna Nawaz live in New York. You're watching continuing coverage now of Judge Neil Gorsuch being sworn in as the 9th Supreme Court Justice, now Justice Neil Gorsuch. We're going to bring you all the news on what this means for cases that are coming up just this next session in the Supreme Court. But first, we're going to head outside of that court. MaryAlice Parks is out there for us on this momentous day to see what the reaction has been among folks there. MaryAlice, what's going on?
It's really lively out here, Amna. You know, spring break has also hit D.C. There are tour groups and students, and it's bright and sunny. You really get this feeling that it is a new beginning for this court that for over a year had been shadowed by the death of Antonin Scalia, and now full, it's bench full, a bright new season for the court, and you can feel that.
MaryAlice, have you been able to talk to anyone out there? Does anyone know about are they just there as tourists, or do they know that today is actually a very momentous day for that court?
You know, it's mostly tourists and school groups. We were talking to a group of 5th and 7th graders just a few minutes ago. They were so cute, Amna. They had prepared the preamble. They knew it by heart. And their teacher, the preamble to the Constitution, their teacher put them on the steps right behind me and kind of proudly had them perform. You know, teachers are trying to explain to their students how momentous this day is. It doesn't come around very often, the idea that you would be able to replace one of only 9 seats. Gorsuch is only 49 years old, so his seat, you know, God willing, will not be vacant again for a long time. These are lifetime appointments, right? These are really rare events. And so you've seen the teachers trying to tell their students what a big deal today is, try to convey that importance. And it's been fun to be out here.
MaryAlice, hang with us just a second. I want to bring it back here in New York. We're joined by Stephanie Rawlings-Blake, the former City of Baltimore Mayor and also former public defender as well. Thanks so much for being here.
It's my pleasure to be here. This is an incredible day, and I'm to see the students out there. You know, the Supreme Court is one of the bodies of government that's really almost secretive, you know, and we don't get to see, it's not like court TV where you get to see them deliberate. And there's so much done, you know, behind closed doors. This does bring shine a light on it and hopefully will inspire our young people. Look, those kids are probably not that much younger than Gorsuch, so they have something to aspire to.
They do indeed. Well, look, this moment has been a very, very long time coming. It has very, very real impact as well, filling that last vacancy. We have a look at their upcoming calendar, right? This is the new arguments calendar for the next session. We know this begins April 17th. He hits the ground running. What kind of an impact do we think he's going to make on some of the key cases?
I think he's going to make an impact on key cases immediately, and that is why I think the conservative groups were so focused during the election on developing a list of approved judges who they feel, just like Trump said in his introduction, not would interpret the Constitution, but would defend their concept of the Constitution. And we know Gorsuch has a history of putting the rights of the faithful, religious freedom, really valuing religious freedom and giving people the right, in some cases even to discriminate, if it meant that they are upholding their own personal religious beliefs without question. So we know that there are cases where that will come up. We also know that you know, he is a defender of you know, what it means to be an American citizen. We've seen that from him, and we know that there are going to be cases where there's going to be issues about immigration that he'll have a say in as well.
And we know there's some very specific cases that will come up related to those. We're going to break those down in just a second. I think we still have MaryAlice Parks with us. I wanted to ask her take on one more thing, because MaryAlice, I know you spent a lot of time on Capitol Hill when Mr. Gorsuch was being shuttled around for all of those meetings, and we saw him there thank Kelly Ayotte, who was sort of his Sherpa through the process. What he said there struck me. He thanked her and he said, "With whom I've spent many months and so many miles trekking through the congressional complex." You witnessed that, right?
Right, it's true. You know, he really had to work here and lobby here. He met individually with a number of senators from both sides of the aisle. And behind the scenes, there was really a campaign that went on, not only with ads running on TV, but lobbyists here talking to those lawmakers. You know, it was a really tough battle, bitterly fought until the very end. They had to change the rules in the Senate to get him confirmed. And so he is really familiar with Capitol Hill because he really had to work the halls.
He's familiar with those halls, and he's familiar with these cases. Literally in his first session, he's going to hit the ground running. Stephanie Rawlings-Blake, let's take a look at some of these key cases we know he will hear in his first session. The first one, Trinity Lutheran Church versus Comer. What's this about?
So this is a case where a church, a religious school, was denied funding, state funding. They applied for funds to retrofit their playground. There's funding available for many playgrounds. I've seen that in Baltimore where they have playgrounds that are old and unsafe, but the schools, because they're not-for-profits, can't necessarily pay for the retrofits to make them safe. So this school applied for the funds and was denied based on the fact that it was a religious institution, so the separation of church and state. Now, again, with the conservative groups that have been very supportive of Gorsuch, I think it's interesting to note that they're very in favor of the separation of church and state when it means that the state cannot impose any of its beliefs on individuals. So when it comes to being able to refuse contraception or refuse abortion, abortion procedures, these conservatives say no, stay out, we'll do it. But when it comes to getting state funds for retrofitting a playground, I'm very curious how Gorsuch will come down, because I think, based on his record, he will contort himself to figure out a way that this is not separation of church and state, and the religious institution should be able to get those funds.
Let's bring in our colleague Terry Moran, who's joining us now from London, has been keeping an eye on Gorsuch all through his confirmation hearings too. Terry, there's a ton of issues he's going to have to tackle in this role over the decades ahead. Of course, this one, when it comes to religious freedom, what do we know about where he stands?
Well, he has been very solicitous of religious organizations that felt they were burdened by the Obamacare's mandate that in its basic package of insurance benefits that employers must provide to their employees. It included contraception, forms of contraception that some religions and people of faith believe amount to abortion, right? The morning after pill, that kind of thing. He's been Little Sisters of the Poor is the classic example of the case that went up to the Supreme Court, and Gorsuch is very, very solicitous to them. This case, however, this Trinity Lutheran case, very important. We will get a sense right away of whether Justice Gorsuch is a classic conservative who may or may not feel that the wall between church and state is too strong, or whether he's an activist and he's going to start knocking it down. Because Missouri, the state in which this case comes from, has in its own state constitution a line that says no taxpayer money will go to religious educational institutions. He would have to strike down, the court, with Gorsuch's vote, if he votes this way, would have to strike down a part of a sovereign state's own constitution. That would be an act of judicial activism on the right, and it's quite possible what happened. We'll find out.
I definitely agree with Terry's point, and it again goes against the conservative notion of states' rights and how the states should be able to determine for themselves certain important issues, and the issue of whether you get public funds for religious institutions is one of those ones where Missouri has spoken very clearly. So I think it is very true. We will see very soon where Gorsuch stands on some really important issues.
And it could have a huge impact too. I understand several other states have a similar law explicitly on the book, so wide-ranging impact there. Here's another case I want to talk about. Stephanie, to you first. Sort of an immigration case, really a citizenship case. Maslanyak v. United States. I hope I'm saying her last name correctly, but it's the case.
I'm glad you said it and not me.
It's the case of a woman who's an ethnic Serb. She fled Bosnia. She came to the United States as a refugee first, I believe, became a naturalized citizen. and then ended up, or is in the process of being stripped of her citizenship. Tell me a little bit about what happened there.
So right now, the Supreme Court will have to make up its mind whether for citizenship it's a material, well, I'm saying defect or material false or lie or misstatement. If that is enough to strip you, or can an immaterial omission or fact in your application be enough to strip you? The federal courts, to this point says if it's an immaterial statement, that's not enough to strip you of your citizenship. But with Gorsuch on the court, they could change that, and it could be any misstatement, which would have it could have a big impact on the immigration status or the citizenship status of many people in this country.
And she, of course, that immaterial statement you mentioned, did not mention or said her husband did not serve in the Bosnian military, and later admitted that he did. Discussion is whether or not that matters. Terry, over to you. What's your take on this case? This is a fascinating one to me, that you could lose your citizenship that way.
Right, and it depends on statutory law. There's some constitutional law involved, but this is basically going to be, we're going to find out by his vote to some extent how Justice Gorsuch defers or does not defer to the administrative authorities who decided this in the first place. And what that means is, he has said in the past he thinks judges should take a little bit more power from the federal agencies, that we've given, in his view, too much power to federal bureaucrats to decide these questions without enough judicial review. So this is a case, although he's the most junior justice, basically on a lot of these, all he's going to do is raise his hand. He's not going to be able to write unless he chooses to write a concurrence or a dissent, and that'd probably be discouraged. You know, he basically answers the door. He sits on the cafeteria committee, and not much else. And he speaks last. He's the last person to speak as the junior justice. And sometimes they can last a while. Probably not here, but Justice Stephen Breyer had to answer the door for 13 years, right? And he had to make sure that the cupcakes were good in the cafeteria for 13 years because he was the junior
Terry,
justice.
is there
for that long.
actually, for those of us who don't know, is there actually a cafeteria committee?
Absolutely.
Oh yeah.
What does that mean?
Well, I mean, the Supreme Court's a little community, actually. It's interesting. You know, there's a basketball court on the 3rd floor, which they call the highest court in the land, of course. And so the building has to run, the staff has to run. You know, there's a relationship between management and workers, and all those things need, there's finances, all those things need administrative taken care of, and the justices get involved. The junior justice gets stuck with the cafeteria duty.
And Terry, you were actually telling that the fact he does answer the door. So when the justices go in conference, it is no staff, no support. It's just the 9 justices, and I guess the newest justice, they're responsible for getting the door if someone wants to come in. So Terry wasn't making that up. He has
That's
door
not a figurative
duty.
statement.
No,
he actually answers
he has
the door.
door duty.
Okay. All right.
And, you know, I'd add one more thing. The justices that I've heard speak about their first year, even if they were great legal minds with vast experience, somebody like Elena Kagan or Justice Scalia, I remember hearing Justice Souter talk about, it is daunting. Because all of a sudden, every single case that comes before you is really the hardest case that the country can produce, because there haven't been agreement on it. The stakes are high, the workload intense, and your vote is a very powerful one. So that first year, a lot of justices just try and get their feet under them, steady themselves, put their shoulder to their wheel, and start pushing and answer the door.
And Terry, that brings the issue of the fact that this is the first time that we have a Supreme Court justice and his clerk serving on the Supreme Court at the same time. So as this first year will be daunting, I'm very interested to be a fly on the wall to see what it would be like to be with this person who used to be your boss, who he clearly has the utmost respect for. That's why he did the oath today, to be able to independently make those decisions with your boss sitting, a little bit ways from you, but still on the same bench.
Well, when it comes to, sorry, Terry, go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to, it's a beautiful thing to see mentor and former clerk together in the Rose Garden like that, and clearly Stephanie says there's tremendous mutual respect and affection there. But I want to rain on the parade a little bit because it does show the level of elitism once again at the highest levels of our government, that it's so almost incestuous at this point. Look at, the court that decided Brown versus Board of Education, the greatest thing Supreme Court ever did, none of them were appellate court judges. They'd been doing all different kinds of things in politics and government and elsewhere. And I'm old enough to have covered the court when Thurgood Marshall sat on that court. He had been, among many, many other things, a trial lawyer in station houses in the Jim Crow segregated South, where his client might have had his teeth kicked out before confession. So he brought to the court, even in his last years when I saw him, a sense of reality, a sense of the lived experience of the law in those station houses, for criminal defendants or poor people, that frankly, for all of his many virtues, Neil Gorsuch is not going to bring.
Well, let's get to some of the broader issues we think might land on his doorstep too, or the door he has to answer. We now know, because look, there are the cases that are on the argument schedule. There are the cases that we know could come up down the line. What do we know from confirmation hearings, from what we know about his past record, when it comes to some of the big issues that were big during the campaign? Things like Second Amendment rights and abortion rights. Terry, what's your take?
Well, he's a staunch conservative. There's no question about it on Second Amendment rights. He's a man of the West, and Second Amendment rights in some ways break down along cultural lines in our country. And he gets a chance in this term because there are a couple of gun rights cases that he will get to vote on right away. Abortion is a much more profound issue, obviously. It's divided the country for many years. He did write a book on euthanasia, in which he articulated a view of the laws around end-of-life issues that many people see as staunchly anti-abortion, anti-choice, anti-abortion rights, I should say, I think is the best way of saying that. And there's no indication of that in his decisions so far, but it's possible. It's possible he could be a vote to overturn Roe versus Wade.
Stephanie?
And Terry, you might agree with this. He didn't give us a lot during those hearings to answer that question, particularly on abortion rights. He danced around those questions that were continued to be asked of him from the senators without really giving a firm answer about what he would do. The only thing that we have to look to is his track record and the fact that he made the list of the judges that these conservative groups approved, and we know their leanings. But outside of that, we just really don't know with Gorsuch.
Let me go back out, Terry, real quick. Let me just go back outside the Supreme Court. MaryAlice Parks has been there for us and covers Capitol Hill. MaryAlice, these are two key issues that came up again and again during the campaign. I'm curious what the conversation around Neil Gorsuch has been on those two issues, or other key things that folks on the Hill think might come up.
Okay, Amna, I have to warn you, it's a little bit loud here, so I think you asked about other key issues, and there's two that I wanted to bring up. One is the issue of Citizens United, that sort of Supreme Court decision that really influenced money in politics. That was a really hot button topic for Democrats here during the confirmation hearings. They are getting it really hard from their base. That is an incredibly unpopular decision among progressives and the left, and a lot of Democrats feel like it was incredibly disruptive to the last campaign and could be for future campaigns. And so far, Neil Gorsuch's record has been arguably even more conservative than Antonin Scalia. Really a First Amendment advocate, not in favor, it would seem to be supportive of any kind of public disclosure of money or funding. And I apologize that it is loud out here, and I feel like I can barely hear you.
No, MaryAlice, we can hear you just fine, but I'm not going to make you do battle with a man with a megaphone any longer. MaryAlice Parks, live there on the steps of the Supreme Court.
It'd be boring if there weren't protesters.
Terry, over to you for a second, though. MaryAlice raised a very interesting case there, Citizens United. This is one of those things that's going to have an impact regardless. Where do we know Neil Gorsuch stands on this?
Well, that sense of libertarianism when it comes to corporate speech, I think, is also part of his jurisprudential makeup, of who he is as a judge. I actually think that had Merrick Garland been confirmed, the man that President Obama appointed to this seat, who never got a hearing in the Senate, the Citizens United might have been in danger. I don't think it is with Neil Gorsuch. I think it's plenty safe, and that is a case that could grow even under a very conservative libertarian perspective, that corporations are people under the law, that they should have speech rights and religious freedom rights and all kinds of things. I would expect the cases to move in that direction with a Neil Gorsuch on a court with this composition.
Well, here's another case making its way through the court system right now. Stephanie Rawlings-Blake would love to know what you think about this. The president's own travel ban.
Oh, absolutely. I think I think it's safe to say when you make that list, you're going to be in favor of the wall. You know, these are people who were staunch Trump supporters who supported his notion of America first, and we're going to edify our borders and do everything we can to keep people out. So, you know, once you've made that list, I think it would be fair to say that you were going to be leaning towards enforcing the travel ban. And again, right out of the gate, there are going to be so many things that will impact the very fabric of our country, what it means to be an American. We've already seen that change in even how Gorsuch was appointed, not appointed, but confirmed to be a Supreme Court justice. We are changing the very fabric of our country. So this is another issue where I think his voice, his conservative voice, his clear leaning could change the course of history.
Terry, you've studied this court. You know them well, better than most, I think. Where will he fit in? I know you said that he's just going to be raising his hand for a little while, but he has a reputation for speaking up from the bench. So where does he fit in?
Well, he fits in at the right end, I think. If Justice Clarence Thomas is the most conservative person on the Supreme Court, and he probably is, Neil Gorsuch would be arguably the next, or Samuel Alito, well, one of them. He is definitely, it would be surprising, let me put it that way, if he votes more with his mentor, Justice Kennedy, who's right in the middle of this court on some issues, votes with the liberals, on some with conservatives. I'd be surprised if you saw much of that from Justice Gorsuch, although justices can surprise you, especially in these biggest cases that get at who we are as a people. For example, that travel ban. It's a very interesting case because this is, remember, travel ban 2.0. The administration rolled it out at first, and it got knocked down by the courts, and it was really a sloppy piece of work done by Steve Bannon in secret with some congressional staffers that were sworn not to tell their own bosses they were working for the White House. It finally went around the various agencies. The pros took a look at it, and just as black letter law, just as if you look at the piece of paper, it's cleaned up. It's a tidy piece of work now, and is arguably within the four corners of the president's authority under immigration laws passed by Congress. But what judges are doing out there, and this is be the question of the Supreme Court, can you take into account the motivation, the intent, the words of President Trump and Rudy Giuliani and other people who said, this is a Muslim ban, we're going to ban Muslims? And that is an interesting question for the court to handle, and one which does get at, are we this kind of people? I could see Justice Kennedy coming out one way on that, and maybe Justice Gorsuch coming out the other way.
We'll have to see. The justices, as you say, may surprise us all. Terry Moran, live in London. Stephanie Rawlings-Blake, live here in New York. And our pal MaryAlice Parks, who has long since succumbed to the man with the megaphone out there on the steps of the Supreme Court. Thanks to all of you for watching, too. Remember, you can always go to abcnews.com for more, and stick around here for your latest live news happening now. For now, I'm Amna Nawaz. I'll see you back here soon.